Have you ever wondered why the conservative, non-affirming, rules-based church is so upside down? They focus downline, shaming and threatening regular people who are just trying to live. Meanwhile, these leaders are hiding rampant child abuse and promoting teachings that are racist, misogynistic, queerphobic, especially transphobic. We've been talking about how the teachings of religion are teachings of contempt at every level. In this episode, we continue our deconstruction of the 7 deadly sins. Today, it's greed. What is it all about, and is there an upside?
Would it be okay if I were to tell you that I am afraid someday, so I call you up and you call me down? Would it be okay?
Well, hello and welcome to the FreedHearts podcast. My name is Robert Cottrell and I'm here as always with
Susan Cottrell.
Hi.
Hi.
Everybody connect with us at freedhearts.org. That's where you can find information about all that we do. Please share what you feel led to share on social media. Connect with us. Email us podcast@freedhearts.org. If you have any questions or any suggestions for the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. And please support us if you can. There's a donate tab on the website, freedhearts.org. It would mean a lot. Thanks. We're going to continue to deconstruct religious baggage with laughter and love. Why it sounds like that, I have no idea. But have you ever wondered why the conservative, non-affirming, rules-based church is upside down? You have noticed that it's upside down, right? I mean, specifically, have you noticed that the leaders kick downline? And what we mean by that is they yell and threaten and shame downline the regular people who are just trying to live, just trying to exist in some cases. And these leaders are kicking them in the face, kicking them in the heart, telling them all the ways that they're wrong, repeatedly. Meanwhile, just being honest here, beloved, meanwhile, these leaders are often sexually abusing children and women and non-sexually abusing them and queer people. They're racist, misogynistic, queerphobic, especially transphobic, and they just skate right over all of that. Let's just forget all of that to attack the people who went there to find some love and community. Yeah, I thought you'd already noticed that that's going on. We've been talking about the teachings of religions that are really the teachings of contempt, us versus them, at every level. Mm-hmm. And when your teaching is contempt, that thing is going to be upside down. There's no way that it won't be. Last week, it was so fun. We ushered in Pride Month. We talked about pride, and we're going to continue today with another one of the so-called 7 deadly sins. Today, it's greed.
Woohoo! Yay! Greed.
Greed.
Okay. the all of the sins, just for your entertainment purposes, are pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth.
Sounds like a party.
Or laziness. Yes, it's a party. Yeah, so we're going to dismantle this baby and have some fun with it. They sound fun, don't they?
Some of them, actually, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, for those keeping score at home, this list of deadly sins is not in the Bible. What?
Yeah, wait, what?
Yeah. They're just a list, a laundry list of sin that somebody came up with. And it looks like the one who came up with them was Tertullian around 200 CE, Common Era. Do you know the name Tertullian? You may recognize him as the same person who gave us hell. Yes, that's right. Thank you, Tertullian. Thank you. No, thank you. And then Augustine fanned all that into a giant burning inferno to terrify everyone. So
no pun intended.
Yeah. So it's not exactly God speaking. The deadly sins, so-called, were later pulled up by Evagrius, a monk in the 6th century, who was writing, not for the populace at large. He was actually writing for other monks about how these deadly sins could interfere with their spiritual practice. Okay, all right. And he said they're called deadly sins because they can kill your soul. Okay, great. You monks do that. That's great. But then to be turned into this populist thing for the monks, for the religious leaders.
Hey, we're the monks.
Hey, we're the monks.
I used to watch, wait, was that the TV show? Monkeys. Sorry about that. I thought I did something. Anyway, okay. That's the laughter part of our podcast.
Right. If you're a certain age, you recognize that song. I don't know if you do if you're too young. But anyway, so this monk, Evagrius, did this for other monks. But now it was tweaked into this whole list. Aquinas made it into a big thing, Thomas Aquinas. And lists like this and other distinctions like venial sin and mortal sin and all those things, or whatever your tradition includes, are just somebody's idea. Somebody who carries a lot of weight. It's their idea sorting out what kind of behavior is or is not acceptable. And it's basically someone with power listing the ways in which those without power should live and should submit to those in power.
Which sounds exactly like what Jesus stood against with the religious leaders.
Exactly.
Why he turned over the tables, folks setting rules, religious leaders setting rules that others are supposed to keep. And when they don't, those leaders oppress and marginalize them.
Right. So thanks for enduring a slight history lesson. But this is why to deconstruct these fits right in with our ongoing deconstruction and the teachings of contempt that go along with it. So, because these kinds of ideas take on a life of their own, but in fact, they're just a structure of power, a platform built to support people in power, to stand over people without power, and threaten them with God's judgment, which, obviously the religious leaders know God's judgment. They know what God wants and doesn't want, and the religious followers don't, so the followers have to submit to the leaders, right? That's how this works.
Yeah, yeek.
But
So, I think that we can actually also flip this notion of greed on its head.
Let's do it.
And I was struck by the difference between the pre-Reformation church approach towards this man-made list of 7 deadly sins and the post-Reformation church. And post-Reformation, almost the entire concentration is on lust, gluttony, which to them means being fat, and sloth.
I didn't know that.
And we're going to get into all of this in upcoming episodes. But personally, I think this shift that we see between the pre-Reformation church and post is because greed, envy, pride, and wrath are what the entire modern capitalist world and actually religious world is based on.
That's really interesting.
Let's think about this. When was the last sermon you heard about the danger of greed or envy or wrath? I mean, from a church that just oozes the wrath of God and conveys the wrath of religious leaders and in rejecting, condemning, shaming. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the simple fact that it's easier to judge people quickly on lust, gluttony, and sloth. These could be triggering here, so just bear with us. But common statements that you hear on this are, the poor are lazy. They don't deserve our help. They breed like rabbits. Sex is sacred. Any sexual activity outside the, quote, norm is the worst sin you could commit. Well, especially if you're female, but young men get a pass.
Yeah.
Just saying. But those who are obviously wealthy, even super wealthy, no matter how shady, well, they make the church look good, prosperous, and they contribute to that building fund we're trying to do here. So no more preaching from the church that sounds anything like, what you do to the least of these, you do unto me. Can't preach that. Just keep hammering away on sex, drugs, and irresponsibility. Why? Because it always sells. Now, greed, let's be honest here. Greed is probably, just take that word itself, it's probably part of all of us. And what I mean by that is we possess a basic drive to want some things we don't have. And I think gratitude, just personally, gratitude for me is a key part of my life to help balance this, you know?
Yeah.
But instead of viewing this, beloved, here's where I want to turn on its head a little bit. Instead of viewing this as necessarily a negative, maybe we can turn this and see it as an opportunity, this desire, an opportunity to improve our lives in deep, important ways, spiritual ways, important ways, and especially an opportunity to improve the lives of others.
Yeah, like through generosity.
Yeah, and
right?
Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott, is a great example. Is she wealthy? Yeah. Is she greedy? I don't know. Maybe. But there's a deep desire to make more if that's there. Why? Well, she's committed to basically give it all away. And she is. She
has been doing that, hasn't she?
Hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in these surprise gifts to these organizations that are life-changing.
Wow.
So if we can be greedy for the ability to do good, be greedy for others to prosper, be greedy for the hungry to be fed, be greedy for justice, I like that.
I like that. That makes sense to me. Well, this fits into the why. It fits into why the outlier is held to a standard of perfection imposed not by God, beloveds, not by the Bible
Yeah, let's
even.
remember that. That's right.
But by religious leaders, while those religious leaders do whatever they want, even when it destroys people. And they literally get away with murder. Do I sound snarky? Good, then you're hearing me correctly. So let's talk about how this all went off the rails and how today's religion teaches contempt for you. To do this, we're going to talk about sin, which we've already alluded to, but what is sin? This is something I learned really deeply in seminary that I didn't know before, but the idea of sin is communal. In these communities in which the times previous really to the rugged individualism of America, sin was a communal situation. Can the community work together to support the people who would be on the margins? It's not. So that's really what's involved here. But it's been turned into personal piety or personal perfection. Like, a multitude of requirements, like who you sleep with or what pronouns you use, and you better get these things right or you're sinning. And all of that is just not true. I wrote a blog post about this a while back where I said, Jesus is not concerned in the least with you dotting your I's and crossing your T's. I said, he doesn't care about your sin the way you've been taught. And a woman commented bitingly, she said, Jesus does too care about sin. Why do you think he turned over the tables in the temple?
Well, that's a good question.
That's a very good question. Yeah, why did he do that? Was it because people weren't doing everything exactly right? No. Was it because people did not have enough personal piety? Personal perfection? No. Was it because people with power, religious leaders, were extorting them, rejecting these poor people's offerings, claiming the animals were blemished and selling them new ones at exorbitant rates, and then putting those blemished ones at the back of the line to sell to the next person at an exorbitant rate? Yes. It was a communal oppression from the top that he was talking about. These regular people came in to do the right thing by God with a heart of humility, their own personal piety, following the requirements, and they were fleeced by religious leaders who were raking in the cash. And like today's religious leaders who are all about butts in the seats and collecting the money. You think Jesus was mad at the persons whose lamb had a blemish on it? Or the religious leader who told them their offering was inadequate and they had to do more? You see what I mean? That's why Jesus threw down those tables. He was livid about the whole spider's web of power that ensnared people who were just trying to live a decent life. Sound like any religious leaders you know? It does to me. And this spider's web of money and power is what Jesus meant by mammon when he said you can't serve God and mammon. or you can't serve God, and money. But it's not just money. It's the whole web of commodification and all being about this system that oppresses people on the bottom. He meant that you can't be caught up in this never-ending quest to take all the money and leverage all the power. You can't serve that and God, or you can't serve people, which is the one and the same. When you serve God, you serve people. When you love God, you love people. You can't serve that system of power and also serve people. Those are at a conflict of interest because the system of power oppresses people. It tramples people. You see what you see what I mean here?
So what does Jesus ask of us?
Okay, he said, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments, and I give you, this is the commandment I give you, a new commandment, that you love one another. That was the requirement that Jesus asked of us, the encouragement Jesus asked of us. And Paul after him said...
You know what? Hold for a second. How simple and beautiful is that?
How simple and beautiful. The truth is simple. It's lies that are complicated.
And how uncorruptible and containable that is.
Yes.
And that's why the church hates it.
That's why they don't teach it. That's right. That's exactly right. And Paul after him actually said very similarly, he said, you owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. This sums it. Now, he said a lot of other things, but he was doing it. He was leading a church through an oppressed community, a whole different purpose. Okay. But this, he understood that love God and love others, everything else will line up under that. And if you love others, you have fulfilled the law. That is huge. And nowhere do we see that to love someone is to exclude them or tell them they're sinning or all the things these religious leaders do.
Keep in mind that they're sinning according to, in most cases, lists that were made by people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
you know what
right.
I mean? So
that's right.
Just keep that in mind.
Yes. And it's a really good, an effective tool belt thing to tell them you're sinning so that they don't actually have to love. They don't actually have to give. They don't actually have to sacrifice to actually serve the least of these, the way Jesus said. If they can accuse you of a ton of sins, then they don't have to just love God and love you because they've rewritten the rules. And the Southern Baptist Convention is a profound example of serving the system, serving mammon and not people. Did you know, we probably said this, the reason they were founded from the Baptists, Southern Baptists broke away so that they could maintain their slaves. Yes. And Promise Keepers was actually set up to address racism. And the people at the top said, no freaking way, and turned it into this other thing.
Yeah. And it actually, I was part of that, involved in that pretty heavily. And it just exploded.
Yeah.
And then it imploded as quickly, even quicker, because all it left people with was guilt and shame.
Yeah. It was just...
There was no power.
Keeping better rules. Yeah. But it wasn't dismantling anything important like racism, like it was set out to. And, I think of Jimmy Carter. He was very good to women. I think he was, a feminist in supporting women, but he was an outlier from the overall tone of Southern Baptists. I mean, look at, and I'm just calling on that, but they're all over the place. Southern Baptist is just one, but their darling, Beth Moore, finally left her cradle faith or the convention. She left because the Southern Baptist Convention willfully ignored the leadership's flagrant abuse of the least of these. And,
there are examples. Yeah, Franklin Graham was a great example of that.
Franklin Graham is
ignoring
just
the least of
all
these.
about his kingdom building and wealth and power. And we don't mean to just dive too deeply here, but I think it's important. And religious history over the millennia, right up into modern religious teachings, have distorted sin. Our conservative or non-affirming religious teaching has turned sin into this personal piety personal perfection, like saying your prayers or saying them just right, or giving enough to church, or being at church, all the things, doing everything according to what your religious leaders teach you, and basically hoping against hope that maybe somehow, some way you can be good enough. And all the while these men, and it is men in these positions, are getting away with extortion, thievery, destroying communities, murder, everything. And they say the problem is who you're having sex with or what your pronouns are. No. It's so transparent when you see it that way.
It is transparent. And we've talked in the past about what the church will do to you, but we consider now heretic a compliment when, and those kind of things. But there's other episodes on this, on how the church will gaslight you and all that kind of stuff. But those who tell you so loudly and directly that you're in sin are the very people who think they're representing the Bible. They're not. They think they're representing God. They're not. Or they pretend they're representing God. They're not.
They're still not.
They're still not. Today's modern, Western, rugged individualist has no idea of the communal nature of sin, how interconnected we are from this viewpoint.
Yeah.
And they may talk about collective sin. People like these big name evangelists from James Dobson, that's the combination of that.
Yeah.
James and Pat had a child. James Dobson and Pat Robertson to Franklin
like to
Graham.
See them have a child.
Yeah. But they're still talking personal piety. Just among the community they hate.
Yeah, it's just it's a teaching of contempt against the community that is causing all these problems.
Yeah, like the absurd, like it's homosexuality that's causing hurricanes and tsunamis and earthquakes. I mean, that whole trope. But they miss the whole part about money and the power system that excludes people, that vilifies the ones without money, and power as it continues to fortify its own money and power.
Yeah,
they just miss and ignore all of this. As they say, it's the gays that cause this. Oh, by the way, send your check to this and this and this and this because I need to keep the gold furniture.
And here's the thing. We really have to manage our emotions, our anger about these things.
We don't mean to sound angry. We are angry.
Yeah.
We are angry. And it's not, but I'm angry at the system. And we don't
want to cost our peace.
Yeah. Again, like greed. I'm greedy for freedom. I'm greedy for social justice. And and so that's why sometimes we sound this way.
And we're proud of you for being who you are and being authentic to yourself as much as you're able to be. So for a person in power, political, religious, financial, who's easier to blame? The senior pastor who's been oppressive, has skeletons in the closet, but wields great influence? Or the gay teen he's kicked out, who his son, he's kicked out of the house because, he learned that the kid has a boyfriend? You think the people in power are going to blame the mogul who's gotten children working in sweatshops? Or the politician who perpetuates poverty while his pals are raking in the money? Or authorities who keep harming unarmed people of color or black people for being black? Think Wall Street. I mean, the movie Wall Street, but also the actual Wall Street. Think The Big Short. Think of any movie of a big corporate greed crushing the little guy. That's a deadly sin, okay? Sin in communal, tribal cultures in the Bible, and also still in communal cultures today, means a breakdown of systems, of the system that we live in, so that people can't live to their fullest potential. That's what sin really means. And greed for money and power are at the root of it. And there's talk about critical race theory, where we simply teach the truth about the systems built into our nation's founding by rich white landowning men and continued today by the same. There's talk about land reparations to restore access to land ownership systematically denied to black people through slavery and then sharecropping and redlining and policing. the systems of the rich and powerful to keep others poor and powerless. Did you know that modern policing began? It was instituted as slave patrol. The NAACP website says this: the earliest formal slave patrol was created in the Carolinas in the 1700s with one mission: to establish a system of terror and squash slave uprisings with a capacity to pursue, apprehend, and return runaway slaves to their owners. Tactics included the use of excessive force to control and produce desired slave behavior. These systems are comprehensive to maintain the wealth and power of these elite. When we say you can't serve God and mammon, or love of money is the root of all evil, it loses its punch. It doesn't capture the essence of the system that keeps all this in place.
That's really good.
Yeah, you can't serve God and these systems of power. And love of these systems of power and participation in these systems of power is the root of all evil. That's more accurate.
Yeah, the justice work that's being done today, like what you said, like the critical race theory and land reparations, are means to address these systems, to redress the grievances of injustice to help bring justice.
Yes.
Now, it's labeled as woke, but again, let's remember what woke means. Just having our eyes opened instead of closed. Hello. In this case, simply open to the truth, in these two cases, about our history and the impact of that history on the Black community and on people of color.
Yeah. So what happens with that? Those who benefit from this system that still exists completely today push back and say, we don't want our kids to feel guilty. No one wants our kids to feel guilty. Obviously, they did not create these systems of injustice. That's not the point. But, and they could easily understand what happened before them if they were taught. No. But it's a very good excuse to say we don't want our kids to feel guilty. And by good, I mean it's a plausible excuse offered up by those who benefit from these systems and don't want them to change. And that's how you substitute personal piety or personal perfection for the real system of systemic abuse of power and breakdown in community.
That's sin. That's what sin is.
That's the whole idea of sin. Yes, exactly.
It's not a personal list. It's the system, the systemic abuse.
Yeah, and you don't want to face the systemic abuse, so you just turn it into this personal perfection, personal pursuit of perfection.
Right. Unattainable. So they keep you focused and in guilt and shame, trying to keep this list that they just came up with to hide their own corrupt system.
Corrupt systems of injustice, top to bottom. That's exactly right. So one of my favorite thinkers, whose quotes I love, is Mohammed Safa. And he said, 50 years of trickle down. Trickle down was Reaganomics, who his running mate Bush said, was voodoo economics. Okay. But it got worked into the system. Safa says 50 years of trickle down has turned the rich into richer, the middle class into poor, and the poor into destitute.
Wow, that's profound.
It's profound. Let me say it again, just because I like it. 50 years of trickle down has turned the rich into richer, the middle class into poor, and the poor into destitute. This is systematic breakdown. This is systemic breakdown. This is sin. The greed is on the other foot. The shoe's on the other foot. We use the word greed for this deadly sin, but the older word is avarice, which means more like a craving. And that billionaires even exist speaks to this avarice, this craving. Steve Jobs' wife said something like, people shouldn't be allowed to be billionaires. And you and I think you and I, Rob, if we had $1 billion, we would fund as many good things as we could. And because I can't imagine feeling the need to keep all that money but it becomes its own craving, the creation of it. A friend of ours who's a millionaire said he just loves making money. Well, a lot of people say that it's the attainment itself. It's like a drug to accumulate so much, like you're playing Monopoly.
Well, and keep in mind that, and I'm not letting the billionaires off the hook in any way whatsoever.
Right.
But these are still people who have been taught and are dealing with, you're not worthy, you're not good enough. So in their way, they're just trying to accumulate more, trying to feel worthy and good about themselves in this never-ending quest, never attainable quest.
Right. And it's never going to do it. And it reminds me of the other quote I love from Muhammad Safa, which is, people aren't going hungry because we cannot feed the poor. People are going hungry because we cannot satisfy the rich.
Yeah, wow.
And that is so true. This is systemic dysfunction. This is sin. This avarice, greed, love of money, love of mammon is the kind of sin that infuriated Jesus. It's why he turned over those tables. And Christians, do you remember in the church, Christians would sing the song, "Break my heart for what breaks yours to God." And then they look for these little sins of personal piety in those they're judging. But it's these systems that, so to speak, break God's heart. Our systems were supposed to be put in place to support people downline of power. And instead, they empower people upline with power. And to add insult to injury, they teach contempt for those downline power, the poor for not having more, instead of contempt against the uber rich for exploiting a system and robbing the poor.
Yep.
And all of this is to return some sanity to our understanding about systemic sin. That's why we're saying all this.
Yeah.
And not follow the misdirection, the sleight of hand to keep us off balance, searching around for our stray hairs of sin when they're parading around in their full coats. Do you understand did that make sense what I just said?
Sure.
Yeah. Don't be tricked is what I'm saying to you, my beloved community. Don't be tricked. Don't let them get away with murdering your heart and your spirit by turning this whole conversation into your personal piety and your personal pursuit of perfection while they're getting away with everything.
Good. So hopefully today helped us take the blinders off, the truth of all of this, and also turn greed on its head. And again, to take the positive here and see it, and maybe see it as an opportunity to improve our lives in deep, important ways, and especially an opportunity to improve the lives of others. Let's crave, let's be greedy for the ability to do more, to do good, for other people in need to prosper. Let's be greedy for the hungry to be fed, for justice. And this can start, I've said this before, but this can start with the next person. Sometimes the systemic things, it feels so big, like, oh my God, what do we do? But this can start with the next person you encounter.
Yeah.
Especially those who doubt God's love for them and by that don't really love themselves. Let's all crave and be greedy for them to come to know the truth and freedom that they are beloved. Their photo is on God's fridge. Next week is our 150th episode.
Really?
Yep. And we're going to celebrate it by talking about lust.
Ooh, how exciting.
We'll see you then.
How titillating.
Bye.
Bye.
Would it be okay if I were to tell you that I am afraid someday? So I call you up and you call me down. Would it be okay?
You've been listening to the FreedHearts podcast. We have extensive resources and vibrant, inclusive community for you at freedhearts.org. Please just come say hello. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for the podcast, just email us at podcast@freedhearts.org. Audio engineering is provided by Luke Johnson. The music is provided by Hannah Cottrell, our daughter, the Grammy-nominated Saint Sinner. You can find out more about her and her music at heysaintsinner.com. Please share, subscribe and follow on your favorite platform, and support us if you can. Thanks for listening.